All right. This is Morgan here with the American Society for the Positive Care of Children, and I am here with Michelle Madrid, who is an author, speaker, adoptee, and she focuses a lot on speaking to adoptees and important messages to adoptive families. So, Michelle, welcome. That's what we're going to be diving into today. It's great to have you here.
Thank you so much. I'm so grateful to be here, honored to sit with you, and I really appreciate the work of the American SPCC. So thank you for what you do.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much. It's our honor. And so you were an international adoptee, correct?
That
And
is
so,
correct.
so we're going to be diving into different topics around adoption. Would you say that kind of your perspective is unique to international adoptions, or can it be applied to adoptive families in different scenarios?
It's a great question. I think that there are unique aspects to international adoption because you layer on, the loss of your first country, in addition to first family, first culture, sometimes first language, depending on where you are from in the world. So I think those are some added layers of complexity. But I definitely think that the the areas we're going to touch on today and explore can certainly be applied to most, if not all, adoptive families. Absolutely.
Yeah, that's great. And what would you say is unique about the relationship between adopted parents and adoptees?
I think that I would say the unique quality of this relationship as adoptive parent and adoptee, and I must say that I'm an adoptive parent as well,
Hmm,
so I can speak from that side as well,
that's awesome.
would be the fact that, the adoptee comes to the adoptive parent not as a blank slate. I think that we come with a lot of information within us, both with having a first story, a first family, first parents, first identity. So no matter what age the child is upon their adoption, I think they have a first chapter. In fact, I know they have a first chapter because I'm an adoptee, and I know that I brought that first chapter, that earliest experience with me into my adoptive family. And so that lives inside of the adoptee. It lives inside of me. It lives inside of the adult adoptees I coach. And so as adoptees, we come to adoptive parents having experienced loss. And when I say that, I follow by saying, consider that something had to come apart before something else could come together. A family had to come apart for another family to come together. And I think that's really important to remember. So there is a shifting of identity and a shifting of reality for the adopted person. And I think this offers up a very unique relationship between child and parent, and one that I think the adoptive parent really needs to be aware of and tuned into. Absolutely.
Yeah. How old were you when you were adopted?
I was just a toddler, but I was in foster care prior to being adopted by my American family. And so, I had that experience
Right.
because my bio mother, my first mother, left me in foster care,
Mm,
and she dropped me off and she turned around and walked away. So it was a rejection. It was a leaving that, stayed with me.
of
And
course.
it's been a leaving and a wound that I've had to work really hard to heal and to understand, and to do so in a way that's compassionate toward myself
Yeah.
and also compassionate toward everyone involved, compassionate toward my bio mother and her circumstances, my bio father and his circumstances, and all of it. And that space, that's what I consider a safe and sacred space that is filled with compassion and empathy and understanding, is really key for adoptees to offer themselves, and then for others to also offer them as they go, as they grow, and as they step onto their own journey of healing, or step into their own journey of healing.
Yeah. And what you're speaking to now kind of reminds me of you. You speak a lot about adoption actually being a loss And I think,
Mhm.
a lot of adoptive families probably think about, they're thinking about gaining a child, and they're thinking about this child gaining a family, and you describe it as a loss. So could you describe that a little more for us? Help us understand what you mean.
Sure, because I understand it is a tender topic, and I'm not saying it's just all loss,
Of course.
right? But I think it's important to understand that there is a loss that is experienced,
Yeah.
and that adoption loss is a very real thing. So I think to explain it is that adoptees experienced a loss early on in their lives, and that loss is felt inside of us. And I think the narrative that we have to see adoption as either or as adoptees is really hard, and that's been very difficult for us. I think that's really, really, really challenging. That if I have to see it as either or, it's either loss or it's gain. And that's been difficult for a lot of adoptees,
Hmm.
because I think we're capable, in fact, I know we're capable
Yeah.
of holding the both and you'll hear adoptees talk about that a lot, the both and of our lived experience as adoptees. I can hold both the loss and I can hold the gain. I
Yeah.
can hold both the shadow and the shine. I can hold both grief and gain. I can hold all of that. I have the capacity to do that. I have a heart and a spirit that can hold both. And I think when you can do that, it helps you to navigate and find some contextualize and begin to understand what this experience really means to you. But if I have to exclude one of them, I'm living as only half of who I am, half of my
Mm.
story. And I think adoptive parents, and again, I'm one, should want a real and transparent and vulnerable and open relationship with their kids. And I think that means that we need to consider that adoption loss is indeed a trauma. It's a traumatic event in the life of our child, and it needs to be safely talked about, safely explored, safely felt, and expressed in order for our children to be able to move forward and heal. So I think just building on that, I think it's really important that adoptees can speak to both um, the grief and the gain, the loss and the love, because for a long time we haven't been able to do that. We haven't been offered the space to grieve what's been lost.
Yeah.
And so we've had to mute those parts of ourselves. And I think my community of adoptees has really suffered for it. I know
Mm.
I suffered for a certain part of my life from that, feeling like I couldn't really openly, honestly, vulnerably express these things. So we have to honor and safely grieve those parts of ourselves that feel that deep weight of loss. And the truth is, I love my first family. I love my first country. I love my first culture. And, I have felt sadness and I have felt loss in my life. I have missed my people of origin, my place of origin. And that's a real experience. You know, Sometimes I say to people, consider that I lost my bio mother in 2019, and it was a loss. It almost triggered in me, Morgan, that sense of loss that I felt as a little tiny one when she placed me in the foster care home and left.
Yeah.
And I had to allow myself to feel that in order to heal.
Yeah.
And when we can't feel it, we can't heal it. And so, if we really, as a community, want to help and support adoptees toward being whole, to arrive at that place of feeling like a whole being, we
Yeah.
have to let them include all of their story, the grief, the gain, what came first, where they are now, and begin to understand it and what that means for them. And it's
Yeah.
really important not to define adoption for adoptees, but say, I'm here to help you and love you so that you can come to a definition of what adoption means to you.
Right.
And that is a really healthy place to be.
Yeah. And for adoptive parents to not to like give them space to feel that without thinking about, themselves and like this idea that they would be offended for like there's must be so much pressure to like feel grateful,
Mm-hmm.
that it would so for an adoptive parent to really create space for the both and is really beautiful. And something that I want to go back to something you mentioned about, being an actually like traumatic experience.
Mhm.
And, we talk a lot about average childhood experiences, just kind of another way of saying trauma and the effects of it long term. But, we also talk about positive childhood experiences and the ways that that can reduce the impact. So, what are some of the ways adoptive parents can reduce some of the negative impacts that can come of adoption?
Yeah, thank you for asking. I think it's such a good question. It's such an important one. And I love what you just said before I answer your question about, adoptees sort of feeling sometimes like they have to walk on eggshells and they have to control everything because you don't want to be seen as ungrateful. You don't want to be the angry adoptee. I always like to point out that anger is one of the 5 stages of grief.
Mm.
It's how we arrive to a place of acceptance and in a place of feeling like, okay, things may not always feel bad. There's going to be some bad days, but for the most part, I know now that I can move forward in a way that's healthy and whole for myself. So the first thing is to understand that anger is a part of the grieving process. It's actually a healthy part, and it's actually really essential. And that anger can look like different things. Maybe it's frustration or what have you. But it's important for the adoptee to be able to feel that and express that safely. As far as the grateful part, I always say, it's not about being ungrateful. Consider if you feel if you have that thought come to you, if you could just stop and say, my adoptee isn't ungrateful, they're grieving.
Mm-hmm.
They're grieving a loss. And maybe the behavior pattern or how I'm taking it is triggering me. So I'm going to I'm going to look deep into my own self. Why is this triggering me? But beyond that, I'm going to open up safe space to have a real conversation, a vulnerable conversation with my child in a way that feels safe for them. And so I think to answer your question, it is understanding that, and I'm a parent, you're a parent, we know, as much as we would like to, we can't shield our children from the pain points, right, of life experience or of their experience as adoptees, their experience with abandonment, relinquishment, adoption, loss, and how that has seated itself within their very being. But what we can do, I think, is we can shore up the space for them to safely explore with you as a parent or with someone like a coach or a therapist, an adoptee informed therapist, an adoptee informed life coach like myself, how they can begin to navigate this place inside of themselves, this experience of being adopted. And so as far as parenting goes, and having those maybe more tender conversations, sometimes the more challenging ones. I like to use this acronym of OPEN, OPEN. And this is how I break it down. O is for offer unconditional love always. We can talk about anything. You can come to me with anything. You can say what you need to say, what you feel you need to express. I'm never going to stop loving you. My love is unconditional for you. And I want you to really feel that. And then P is for prepare safe spaces for hearing your adoptee. What is that space where your child feels most comfortable? Is that in their bedroom with a plushy toy in their lap? Is it, outside under their favorite tree? If they're older, is it taking a walk on the beach or going and sitting in the car? I have a lot of conversations with my teenage son who is, adopted from Russia. We have some of our most profound, transformative conversations in the car. I just stop the car and we talk. And it's, that little safe cocoon. And he feels really safe there. So find that space, prepare that space, and just stack pillows of grace all around it, right? This is the no judgment zone. I am your parent. I am also a sound adult, a safe adult that you can talk with. E is for engage with your child, but never force your opinion on them, never judge them. In other words, I'll give you for example, my sweet adoptive mother used to say to me, adoption means love, that's it, just be grateful and move on. And I know she meant well, but it really, it would stop the flow of real emotion, and it would censor me. And I can remember feeling very anxious and tight in my chest, and like someone had a hold of my throat when she did that.
Yeah.
And I think we don't want to define what this experience means for our children. We want to encourage them, help them, support them in coming to their own definition of what this means for them, this experience of being adopted. I think we can do that. We can really transform our relationship with our children to something that is really special and quite magical, quite honestly. And then in the last letter in open is for nurture. Just speaking of atmosphere, nurture an atmosphere of always here and always ready to listen. So OPEN, open. If you can just keep that in your mind and in your heart, I think within that openness, you'll see profound transformational shifts as your adoptee feels safe to be vulnerable, to soften all of those protective mechanisms and open up to what is really, really, really going on inside. And I love that. I love the word really. I always ask there's different energy from saying, how do you feel, to how do you really feel?
Yeah.
It's a whole different energy. And I think people, adopted or not, when you say that, when you ask them the question in that way, it's like, oh, someone really wants to know how I feel.
Yeah.
They really want to see me,
like,
right?
You can be honest.
Right.
No, I'm letting you know that, like, I'm not expecting you to say I'm fine so we can move on.
Exactly. And we do that a lot, right, in our society. Absolutely. No matter what it is. We do that so much in our society. How you doing? Oh, I'm fine. Well, how are you really doing?
Moving on.
Yeah. But if you say, how are you really doing? I think that causes someone to pause and go, well, that's a different way of asking me. And then they ask them, how am I really feeling? How am I really doing? And I want to get to that place. I want to get to that place of being able to express how I'm really feeling, and of also forging those kind of conversations within my family, within my parenting. How are you really doing? Within my friendships, within conversations like this. How are we really, what do we really want to talk about here? What are we really trying to get to in this conversation of adoption? And I think when we do that, we can really transform the narrative, the conversation, the feelings, all of it, and this beautiful community of hearts. Because I know we all want the best for birth families, for adoptees, for adoptees, who are the center of all of this, and for adoptive families. We want the best for them. And so I think in order to do that, we have to get to the really.
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. I love that. And so parents are coming to our parenting resource center every day, seeking answers from anything to, what do I do about bullying, to, how can I make sure this room is safe and childproof? So what do you think are some of the questions that are unique that adoptive families or parents should be kind of seeking answers to?
Well, I think it goes back to the really. I think one of the most powerful questions is, what does it really feel like to be adopted? What is that experience really like for my child? And how can I, as their parent, come to a place of more deeply understanding how my child may be feeling inside, how my child may be feeling about the first parts of themselves that may be, in some place or in some way have been placed in some dormancy. How can I help them safely explore the parts of themselves, those earliest parts? I call it the first me I was before I was adopted. That little girl still exists. And part of my healing had to be to reconnect with her and reclaim her and love her, and know that everything I do today, I do for her. I have her picture with me. I have the name of my first me tattooed on my arm. Not saying that people need to do that, but for me, it was a reclaiming of the fact that that little girl exists inside of me, and something happened to her. And it was a shift in her life, and she became Michelle. And I didn't want to feel splintered from that little girl anymore. And so I think it's really important for adoptive parents to contemplate that that child still lives within their child. right? And I do think that means we need to open ourselves up to hearing adoptees of all ages, of all experiences, all perspectives and walks of life. That's very important. We are individuals. Our adoption experience is as unique as is each adoptee, but there are threads of similarity that bind us all. I think adoptees have a wealth of information to share and valuable insight, and they want to help through the sharing of their stories and their experiences. So I would say to those listening, don't be afraid to hear adoptee truths, because I would bet my life on the thought that parents will learn something, even if it's one little nugget that will help them connect more deeply to their child, help them understand their child more deeply, and to move closer to understanding what it really, really feels like for their child to be adopted. I think those things are just really important to keep in mind and keep close to heart.
Yeah, that's great. Well, Michelle, I think that you've given adoptive parents hopefully a lot of things to think about if they haven't already. Hopefully, some of this as just good reminders.
Yeah.
But for those that it's maybe a new way of thinking about how they can care for their family, then hopefully we'll see the impact for generations.
Oh, I hope so.
Yeah. So thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you so much. I really appreciate being here. Thank you for having this space, opening up space for these kind of conversations, because they are so meaningful and so important. And I can't thank you enough.
Yeah. Thank you.
Mm-hmm.